Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. We've got a very exciting Monday Night Live today because I've got Carole Peters-King with me. And Carole started her career as a journalist, ended up as a war reporter, and now is the Global Communications Director for the Sailors Society. The Sailors Society looks after sailors all around the world, and there's 1,000 ships going through the Red Sea in a very precarious, dangerous position at the moment. Carole's also made a number of documentaries, one on the psychology of serial killers. So we really are going to have an interesting afternoon. Carole, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And Carole, tell us a quick snapshot about yourself.
Oh, about me. Well, I'm also, the one thing that Derek didn't mention, I'm also a Church of England priest. And I had 7 parishes up in South Northamptonshire for a while, later in life. And I've gone back to my role in comms and journalism, but I still keep my hand in, as Godfrey knows, helping out on Sunday in some rural parishes in Dorset. So I still do a little bit of priesting on the side. And I describe myself as a priest, as a cross between Bridget Jones and the Vicar of Dibley, for those of you who have ever heard of the Vicar of Dibley. Very like that. I started off my journalistic career in newspapers, as we said, on the Leicester Mercury, worked in radio for a while, moved into television, firstly as a reporter on screen, very quickly decided I much preferred to be the one giving the orders. So went behind the camera and became a producer director and did that for quite a long time before moving and becoming a priest. And then, as I say, going back in and doing some comms work as well.
Carole, tell us about the Sailors Society, because I know you're doing some fantastic work and it's very dangerous crewing a ship at the moment through the Middle East and through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal.
It is. It is. All seafarers struggle. The charity I work for, Sailors Society, was set up in 1818 when there used to be signs all around ports across the world that said no prostitutes, no sailors. So they weren't allowed anywhere. And our charity was a number that was set up at the time to look after the welfare of seafarers. And that's what we do today. We offer a 24-hour service where seafarers can call us, and they can also talk to each other through peer-to-peer support groups we offer. And we also have a crisis response network, a global crisis response of trained responders. And of course, they're the ones who are working at the moment, because as Godfrey said, it takes 48 hours to go through the most difficult part of the Red Sea at the moment for any container ship. And during that point, the seafarers are just sitting targets. There's nothing they can do. They're on these big ships and they just hope and pray that the missiles don't hit them when they fly overhead. And so if they, all they need to do really is talk to somebody. And that's what we offer, somebody on the end of a phone or on the end of a text message that can just talk them through what's happening there. We also do welfare training as well. So we do a lot of training for seafarers in just about their own physical and mental health, because going to sea is not easy. It's not a job where you earn a massive amount of money and you can be away from home for months on end, in some cases years on end. And so it's a tough job. It's a tough job. I mean, we all went through the pandemic and we all know what it was like to be trapped somewhere and not being able to go out and do anything. Imagine if you're on a ship for a year and, and you can't go anywhere. It's tough. And so we do a lot of work with seafarers to help them through. And that's my role, is to communicate that and also to help do a little bit of my priest role, a little bit of chaplaincy role as well, helping out with that.
So how do they phone you? They can't phone you on their mobiles, can they? Because that
Oh,
would
yes.
cost a fortune.
No, it's a free to use line, so it doesn't cost them to actually call us, or they can text us and we'll call them back. But a lot of seafarers now on some of the bigger ships, there's free Wi-Fi, and that's something else we actually offer them. We, through various companies that offer that, we can give them a free Wi-Fi card and they can use that to call their family and call us.
So after the Leicester Mercury, you came down to London, did you, and started making documentaries? Is that your timeline?
No, first of all, I went and worked in local radio, and I worked in local radio in the Midlands. And moving across to Coventry, I worked for a very, very prototype Coventry cable television. And it was one of the first local television networks that was set up in the days before we had Sky and everything else. And it was wonderful. And I used to read the news on that, and it was self-operating. So I had to set up my own auto cue, run that with one finger while I was trying to read the news with the other. And we had a sock puppet that did the weather forecast for us. It was cutting edge journalism. It really was. And from there, I moved down to London and started to work for regional television for a program called Thames Reports. And from there, went on and worked for different broadcasters. I worked for the Discovery Channel. I've worked for some American broadcasters. I've worked for Canal Plus, which is a French network. Just basically anyone who would put up the money to make a documentary.
Wow. And you worked for some pretty aggressive alpha male producers, didn't you, as well?
And I've worked, yes, but I've given my own. Yeah, we've got some tough people out there, but not as tough as me. I can give my own in those situations.
Did you have to learn to be tough, or were you well, you went into journalism? I suppose you were pretty tough to go into journalism.
Yes, yeah. I think when you get into journalism, you've got to get the story. But I think working on a local newspaper, it's amazing because you learn about respecting people. Because the thing is, if you're doing a story on someone, then they know where you are and they can come and complain if it's not right. So you really learn to tell the story well and care about people. I think that was the other thing I learned. I always remember going on my first, what we used to call in journalism, a death knock, which was where somebody died and you had to go and knock on the door and ask the family about it. And this was a gentleman who died in a motorcycle accident, a young lad of 20. And I sat outside the house for about 3 hours. I didn't want to go in. I felt awful. I eventually taught myself to knocking on the door. And the first words out of the lady's mouth were, "I thought the Mercury had forgotten about us." She just really wanted to tell her son's story to the press. And that was a lesson for me. But throughout my career, we've made a point of always being respectful of people and making sure that what we tell is the truth and that people know that, and that people don't feel that we're doing, the sort of journalism that we wouldn't be proud of.
So you were on a program like Watchdog that we've got now, and I understand that you were described as a doorstepping terrier. What does that mean?
Well, there was a gentleman around at the time called Roger Cook, who used to do a very strong consumer program on the British Channel ITV network, which was the independent channel of the time. And he was very well known. He was a very big man. He was quite aggressive, and they used to call him the Rottweiler. And we started out with the newly formed Channel 4, which was a new broadcast network in the UK that came on board. And they wanted their own consumer program. And I was one of 3. At that point, I was still a presenter presenting the program. And my technique was slightly different to Roger's, because Roger would always go up, big bruiser with his guards, tell the story. And I would do the opposite. I would go up with my microphone behind my back, looking very sweet and very innocent. And of course, often some of these criminals, these gentlemen, seeing a little blonde coming towards them, would automatically not run away, but come to see what I wanted. At which point I'd pull out the microphone and ask them about their dodgy freezers or whatever they'd done wrong. And as a result of that, a newspaper at the time did a centre page spread. They said the Rottweiler versus the terrier. And they had our two different techniques. They talked about us and how we did it.
Were you scared?
No, I don't think so, because you've always got a crew with you. So you're never on your own in those situations. You've always got, that was the difference between doing newspaper reporting or even radio reporting, where it's just you. When you do anything with television, you've always got the cameraman. In the days when I was doing it, you often had a sound recordist. You may have had someone else there. So you were never really on your own. And that meant that, you've got some kind of backup. And somehow as well, with a camera there, you kind of know that even if somebody does something terrible, it's being recorded, and that somebody's going to know it's happened. So I think you feel a little bit safer than that. I always remember when I used to go out on newspapers, my news editor would always say to me, if I was on a late shift, "Carole, please leave your address of where you're going. Always let us know where you're going," because it was in the days before mobile phones as well, you see. So there was a chance then, as a young single female reporter, you were going out at night, knocking on doors, doing things, nobody knew where you were. So that was slightly different. I mean, now we have mobile phones, everyone knows where we are.
So what was the biggest thing you exposed when you were a consumer journalist?
Well, I did something on smoke hoods. I think that was one of the ones I'm most proud of. There was a big plane fire here called the Manchester air disaster. Some of you may have heard of it. If you're not from the UK, it may not be big, but it was basically a plane that caught fire just before it was taxiing off. And for the first time, people were able to sort of understand a little bit about what people suffer from when a plane catches fire. And of course, it's smoke. It's smoke. Everything in a plane is combustible. And a lot of people lost their lives, and we were approached by a gentleman who had lost his wife and his 2 sons on the plane. Sorry, this is not going to get negative, it's going to get better. And he was very keen to promote smoke hoods. And he felt very strongly that people should wear smoke hoods on planes. If you have never seen a smoke hood before, it's literally like a plastic bag you put over your head, but it allows you to breathe while you get off the plane. The CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK, and other authorities don't believe in them because they believe it will delay the amount of time to take you to get out of a plane. But the difference is between breathing and getting out of a plane and not. And John wanted us to show how good the efficacy of smoke hoods. And to do that, we found a place up in Scotland, RAF Montrose, where they train firefighters in how to put out fires on planes. And the way they do that, they have a huge bath of aviation fuel on the top of a great big oil rig, and they sit a plane fuselage on top. They light the oil and it goes up, and they then battle it and blow it out. And occasionally they put crew and things inside the plane, so they just get a feel. But it's very quick. As soon as they light the fuel, they immediately douse it down. And so it's very safe. And so we decided we'd go up, and the idea is I would go inside, I would wear the smoke hood, and I would demonstrate how important it was. The problem being, when we got up there, we realized that it's too hot in the plane for a camera. So the camera had to stay outside. We'd have to fake that. And one thing about television you'll know is sometimes you shoot things many times. So we would do a version afterwards when there wasn't actually any flames, and the camera would then film me. But for this part of the thing, I was radio mic'd up, and I went in, and my first clue that something might not be right was I was with a fireman who was in full kit with the breathing apparatus and everything, and they'd stuck me in some Charlie's Angels outfit, with a zip up, with the slightest little bit of fire retardant on. But the fireman said to me, look, if anything goes wrong, Carole, a bit like a diver, thumbs up, you're fine, thumbs down, we get you out. And I got on the plane, and they lit the fire, and I thought this was very realistic, and I'm talking to the microphone and saying, this is amazing, the flames are coming through, this is, I can only imagine the plane filled with smoke immediately, and I put my smoke hood on and I could breathe, and I was saying how great it was and how this was not what I was expecting, and the fireman was giving me the thumbs up, and I was agreeing with the thumbs up. And what I didn't know is the wind had changed direction, and they couldn't douse down the flames, and that they shouldn't have been blowing into the plane at all. But the fireman decided that as I was calm, he wasn't going to tell me this. And as I was chatting away, and anyone knows me, knows I can talk the hind legs off a donkey. And so he left me to it. And eventually they doused down the plane. And the only thing that really annoyed me is when they did that, they blew the foam in, and it came through where the hole had burnt in the side of the plane where I was sitting. And I got a soaking wet bottom as a result. And so that was what upset me more. And then when we got out, the idea was they opened the plane up, and we'd rehearsed it beforehand. I would come out, I would take off the smoke hood, and I would say, thanks to this smoke hood, I have been absolutely fine in this plane, and it's, what we should all have. So I eventually got out of the plane, thinking it was taking a bit longer than it should. Got out, said my piece, pulled off my smoke hood, looked at all these people who just looked, like rabbits in the headlights. And then my next words out of my mouth, couldn't help it, was, and you know what? I've got a soaking wet. At which point the director went, cut. But apparently, and I have checked with them, there's a little plaque up to say I hold the record for spending the longest time in a burning plane.
Gee whiz. And you don't get scared. You tell me you don't get scared. Now, you've done a lot of investigative journalism, but you did one particular job in Rwanda. And you told me about that, how you were chased out of Rwanda, and you had a magic secret for dealing with the general. Tell us all about that.
I was working for an ITV series called The Big Story, and it was just after the genocide in Rwanda. And we were sent, as often is the case with these programs, the idea is we would find the people who had committed the genocide, and we'd ask them why. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? And it's such a good idea for a program. So out I go. And it was my first time in a war zone, so I wasn't sure what to expect at all. And the first thing I noticed was how heavy the flak jacket was and how strange it was. And I was befriended by some Associated Press, mad Australian photographers on the plane going over. And they just said to me, take all the snacks you can take all the snacks. Why? And apparently it's because there's no food, obviously, when you get into a war zone, and there's no water or anything. So in the evening, you all sit around together, the journalists, you take it in turns to buy supper, which is you literally throw a bag of peanuts into the centre and everybody descends on it and you all eat together. But we discovered that the actually, which sort of people roughly knew, the Hutu generals who had committed the genocide had moved up out of Rwanda and were staying in Goma, which is what was Zaire at the time. So we travelled up, and we got up there, and it's quite dangerous there. There's a lot of mines and there's lots of things going on. we'd gone into the camps and we discovered, unfortunately, that a lot of the Hutus were hiding there, that we didn't know the military. So we just narrowly escaped a machete ambush, but we got out of there all right. And then I'd gone into the centre of Goma, spoken to the mayor of the town and said, I really want to find the general. Can you help me? And the mayor had said yes. And something I was telling Derek about Goma is it's like a Wild West, American Wild West town. It's in the middle of nowhere. And it's very strange. And the most strangest thing about all the senior officials there, anyone important, wears a suit, but no shoes.
Wow.
Very strange, but that's a war zone country for you. Anyway, so we were there and eventually we got the call to say we could meet the general, he would meet us. And two of his goons arrived dressed in the suits and the sunglasses, no shoes, in a big old Mercedes. And we get in the car and the crew is following because they wouldn't let the crew in the car. They let me and an interpreter in the car. And halfway there, they were they pulled over into a field and got a gun out of the glove compartment. And my interpreter's just shaking his head and drawing his finger and going, this is not good. And then there was much chatter. And then the gun went away. And then the interpreter was putting his thumbs up. And then as we drove on, he said, they've just had a conversation about the fact that, you know, they were going to kill us. And then one of the guys said, but the general likes blondes. Let's take her. And that was held in the back of my mind. And it was proved very useful because when we got there to interview the general, as you would imagine, he's in this big compound. There's lots of men with machetes and guns all around him. And I'm having to ask him why he committed genocide. It's not an easy question to ask. And I asked it, and his answer was, it wasn't genocide, they were casualties of war. I did push it a couple of times, but when people started to put their fingers on guns, I didn't push it any further. And then we thanked them for the interview, and I went to leave, and the general said, I'm sorry, you can't go. I've changed my mind. And I said, well, you know, we've really got to go, General. Really want to get this on air. We want your side of the story on air. Really want to do this. I have to get back to the UK. We've got a plane waiting for us at the airport to fly us home. Really got to go now. And he was like, no. And then in the end, I said, but I understand you've been to Paris before. Do you like Paris? Yes, he loved Paris. And we discussed Paris and we discussed a particular restaurant he liked that I liked. I said, I tell you what, General, I really do have to go now. But how about we meet next week in Paris at this restaurant? And if there's a hotel room afterwards, it's fine by me, whatever you want. But he said, that would be lovely. I said, well, let's do that. I must go now. And the general said, okay. So, but I think it took him about 10 minutes to realize he'd been had, because as we got out of the compound and headed off down the road, we were then followed by very angry men firing guns at us. But we managed to get to the airport, get to the plane. And to this day, I remember being incredibly, again, in these situations, heaven knows why, you feel braver than you are. I was carrying what we call the rushes, which were the tapes of the interview. And the cameraman was already on the plane because they'd gone already. And the plane was starting to taxi. And I threw the rushes onto the plane and said, here, take the rushes. I'll be all right. Take them. At which point, these lovely Australian journalists I'd met before were there because they were anywhere there was any trouble. And they literally manhandled me, picked me up and threw me onto the plane. And we took off Indiana Jones style out of this little airport at Goma with the guns firing. It was very exciting and quite scary.
I think you should make a movie of this. This sounds like, and I know you're a friend of Damian Lewis as well. This sounds like a Damian Lewis story in a way.
But it always happens. I mean, these things happen when you're there because you're in a different situation. You're in a different world, you know, a world where life is cheap, where guns are plentiful. And these things just happen. You know, they don't just happen in movies. They do just happen. But I remember you asking me, Derek, whether it feels scared or abnormal. And I likened it, I think the way I can describe it now, because we've all been through it, is the pandemic. When we were in the pandemic, it felt normal, didn't it, to everyone? We were in the pandemic, we were wearing masks, we were washing our hands, we weren't going out, and it felt normal. And it was only afterwards we look back and go, that was so abnormal, it was weird. And we come out of it thinking, how on earth did I do that? And it's the same when you're in a war zone, anywhere like that. When you're in it, it's somehow not your normal and you just live it as normal. And it's only when you get out that you realize that actually that is not normal. And it actually was quite scary. You know, being machete ambushed, having large machetes come through the roof of a Land Rover, really scary. But at the time, you're just thinking, okay, I've just got to get out of here. Let's get on with it.
I wonder what your heartbeat was and your blood pressure was at that point. Sounds like you're pretty cool about all these things.
Probably higher than I like to imagine. Although I was saying to you before that when I realised how scary it was when we got back to the UK, and we pulled out of Heathrow, you know, normal in a taxi, and it stopped at the traffic lights, and I started to shake uncontrollably and sweat. And I realized that the whole time I've been in Rwanda and Goma, the only time we'd ever been stopped anywhere was at a checkpoint where there were people with guns and our lives were being threatened. And say at the time it was normality, but once I got into the real world again, the normality, that is when that sort of stopping and in a car, just obviously everything hit in, the flight or fight then hit in, and I was like, oh, what am I doing here, you know? And all I was doing was waiting for lights to go green. It was ridiculous, you know.
Wow. Now, you were telling me about the other programs you'd made, and you've written a book on the on the psychology of a serial killer. Also, you've written a book on the series of spies, or was that just a program you made?
That was just a program I made. Yes, the book was on Harold Shipman, Dr. Harold Shipman. We were commissioned to make a series on the psychology of serial killers, the idea of profiling, which came from America, and what actually goes on in the head of a serial killer, why they kill, and how, you know, what's the chain of events that lead them to become a serial killer as opposed to a murder. And interestingly, I was told by one of the profilers at the time that we're all capable of murder, not just once, but twice. Human nature means we will kill to survive, and then we will kill again to cover up that first killing. And it's human nature, but that's when it stops. And that's why a serial killer kills 3 or more, because it's those extra deaths, those extra killings that go beyond what we're all capable of, if you like. And so that was the idea of the series. And we were making that looking at British serial killers, starting off with Jack the Ripper, way back at the beginning, and working our way through. And it was while we were in Manchester filming about the Moors murderers, which were 2 killers in the UK who killed children. And that was the first partnership that really profilers were able to look at, a man and a woman, and how they egged each other on, and the sexual component in that as well. And while we were there, the police in Manchester were saying, there's another one, it's big, and actually he's a doctor, and no one ever expected a doctor to be a serial killer. And because, as I said to you about the way we worked, we'd become very close to them. They trusted us with the information. They knew we wouldn't go public on it until we were ready. And there was a big inquiry with a lady judge in this country who had a huge inquiry into Harold Shipman as to how a doctor could kill, because he'd begun killing as a junior doctor and he got away with it for years and years and years. And we were allowed to make the documentary and have access to all the findings of the inquiry, providing we didn't put out the documentary till the night after the inquiry finished. And that's what we did. And while we were doing that, I was also approached and said, will you write a book on the subject? So I wrote a book about him as well that went with it. Not anywhere as interesting as your book about your grandfather, which sounds fascinating, which I really want to read. But it was an interesting to look at the chain of events and how he got away with it, and how he changed, how he experimented when he was in hospital with different ages to find an age that worked for him. It sounds really bizarre, but that's the mind of a serial killer. It's a high, it's a hit, it's like drugs. They find something that gives them that high, and then how he then managed to continue and as a doctor get away with it for so many years.
Gee whiz. So tell us about the series on spies and what happened outside MI6.
Well, we made a series about spies. It was the history of spying, again, looking at forensic about why people spy and in what ways. And we filmed a lot in Russia, and we looked at the 60s and what was going on there. And as part of it, we were obviously filming the MI6 building, and we've been very good. And I think we got a bit blasé, because when I first started the series, I had sent a letter to both MI5 and MI6, which are our security services, saying we were making this series about British spies and just wanted them to know, could we interview anyone? And I, as always with our formal letters, probably letters you all send out, business letters, it had my business number on and my details and my office work. And about 2 days later, I was at home and my mobile rang, and the voice at the other end said, this is whatever it is from Victoria House, which is MI5 in the UK, clearly telling me that. And he said, I understand you're at home today. Well, we haven't told anybody, and he hadn't rung the office. It was just like, one in a, there we go, just want you to know, we know where you are, we have your number, we know everything about you. So we got very blasé about the whole thing, about them knowing everything. So we probably weren't we thought we told people, but we probably hadn't told everybody that we were filming the MI6 building, which is what we call the wedding cake, which is in the James Bond film. And we were filming it. And when you hear sirens going, and someone always jokes, oh, they're for us. Well, in this case, they were, but it wasn't just police sirens. It was a police boat. It was 2 police helicopters, and it was large vans. And the first we knew was people with guns and flak jackets going, on the floor now, on the floor now, splayed out on the floor going, we're making a documentary, we're making a documentary. And eventually understood, but somebody had seen the camera point and they thought it was a rocket launcher. And so everybody had scrambled.
Gee whiz.
A bit of trouble. You're in a bit of trouble over that. It was just a little bit.
Wow. Carole, you seem to me the least likely person to be an associate priest, to be honest. I love The Vicar of Dibley. I think it's a great series. How come you became a priest?
Well, I'd always had a deep faith. I'd always gone to church. I think looking back, if in the UK we'd had women priests when I left school, it was always journalism had always been my thing. I'd grown up in a journalistic environment. As a small child, I'd gone into my father worked in newspapers. I used to go into the office with him on a Saturday and they'd sit me on telephone directories in front of a typewriter and let me play, and I'd shout copy and play around. So I think I was always going to be a journalist, but I also had this faith. So I'd considered being a priest, but at that point, the Church of England didn't take women. So my view was, if you don't want me, I don't want you. That's fine. I'll go off and do something else. But God had always been in my life, very strongly, very powerful faith. But I think I've been a bit naughty. I was having such fun that I sort of put God in a room and gave him a cup of tea and said, I'll be back and see you later. Don't really want to get involved in this priest stuff at the moment. Thank you very much for calling. We'll forget about that for now. But it just became more and more obvious that I was being called. And eventually, slightly reluctantly, I decided to go through there's a process, a discernment process. It takes about 2 years for the church to decide whether or not it's a right fit, if you decide and the church decides. And I did the 2 years, and at the end of it, they said, yes, we'd like you to be a priest. And then I had to then say, can I be a priest? Do I want to be a priest? So I gave up making documentaries, turned down some really lovely jobs, but made myself prove that I could do it. And it was the right time. And it just was. It was the right time to go into to serve God, as he had let me have such a fabulous life and had kept me safe for all those years. It seemed a fair swap.
Now you've got a sort of a funny story. I'm not sure how funny it is, but I got a picture of you here dressed up on the screen, and there's a story that goes with this.
Okay, so the picture, hopefully the picture Derek's going to show you is a picture of, it's not up at the moment, Derek, but it's we used to have a nativity. This is the Vicar of Dibley moment. We had a nativity in a barn, which was a sort of dress up and tell the story of Jesus. No, it's not come up, Derek. I don't know if you can get it.
Okay, I'll keep trying. I'll have another go now. Let's see if it comes up now. Does that come up?
Okay, here we go. This is me dressed as the angel Gabriel, taking part in our Vicar of Dibley-esque nativity in a barn that we did every year. But obviously, being a vicar, you get to do fun things like this, but you also have to do the day-to-day job that a vicar has. And about 6 months before this, a lady had come up to me and explained her husband was dying. He had a terminal illness and he really wanted me to deliver the last rites, which I said I would be absolutely delighted to do. And she said, the one thing is, Carole, I don't think when it comes, I will be able to say the words. And I said, you don't have to. Just pick up the phone, say, come, and I'll know what's going on and I'll be there. Whatever the time of day or night, don't worry. So we had that deal. And then over the next 6 months, I regularly came and visited this gentleman, and he was slipping away slowly from cancer. And this particular day, I was all dressed up like that, ready to go, literally leaving the rectory, heading off to take part in the barn, and the phone goes, and it's come now. So I went dressed like that to the house. I let myself in because I knew the family very well through the back door, went to give the last rites to this gentleman who knew it was the day of the nativity in the barn. So he wasn't at all surprised that I'd arrived like that. By the way, what you can't really see there is I have light up wings, and they do light. They're huge wings and they light. So the wings were lit as well. So I had light up wings. And I knelt by his bed and I gave him the last rites, and we shared a little bit of a giggle on the way I was dressed, and that would have been fine, except that he had a nurse at the time visiting him and no one had told the nurse. So this poor nurse walked into the bedroom of her dying patient to see the angel Gabriel giving him the last rites. And then to just add insult to injury, if you like, she then went out of the room in complete shock before I could say anything, went back into the kitchen where the wife was and said to the wife, there's an angel with your husband. And the wife went, oh yes, I know. Very Vicar of Dibley, very Vicar of Dibley.
Wow. Well, we're nearly out of time, Carole. One last piece of advice for anybody watching this live, watching this on YouTube, or listening to this, from all your experiences of life, what would it be?
Enjoy it. Enjoy the moment. I think enjoy whatever you're doing, because we only get one chance to do what we're doing, and make sure that, you know, you're a decent human being while you do it. I think if you can hold your head high at the end of it and say, you know, I did the best I could. I wasn't awful to anyone. I did what I could do to make the world a better place, but actually I had fun while I was doing it. I think that's the thing, isn't it?
And Carole, you've got enormous energy, enormous enthusiasm, enormous fun, a great sense of humor, which translates to other people. So congratulations on what you're doing. Thank you for joining us on Monday Night Live. And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give Carole a vote of appreciation in the normal Monday Night Live way? That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for doing that. And I hope at some stage you'll come back and share some more stories, although I'm not sure you want some quite as much excitement as you had in places like Rwanda, etc. Carole, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, I've